Here we go. Now you can hear me. Okay. Let me know you can hear me. Okay. It's been a bit of a rush. I'm literally just off a preparatory meeting for a roundtable that's happening on Friday, and it was literally like get off that platform onto this platform. Um, so we have a lot. And I know I always say this, but we have a lot to talk about this evening. And we're really going to go into the chaos point that we are in. You know, we have seen that there's been reports in Jerusalem of friction between Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump on a phone call. We don't know, you know, reporters report whatever. So we don't know the truth and the authenticity of that. But there are certain things that we do know. There's certain things that we know that are going on in the world right now. In the UK, it is predicted that the majority of abattoirs in terms of meat slaughtering and the preparation of meat for consumption will be closed by 2030. We've already dropped from 2,500 in the 1970s to 203 right now. Now, that goes along with the 2030 agenda of not everybody not consuming and being meat consumers, you know, not having the protein in your diet. And it also goes along lines of First Timothy 4, in which they will forbid you to eat certain meats. We know that right now China is refusing to use or trade in the US dollar. We know that Europe is pushing for a nuclearized Europe, not in terms of member states, but in terms of as a single entity, standing alone as a counter or as an alternative to the likes of NATO. I will say hello to everybody in a second, but I just want to give you a brief setting of where we are before we get to the nuts and bolts of what we're going to talk about tonight. We know that AI is now starting to shape the world, the infrastructure, with the Riyadh Declaration of last year, the 16th of December 2024, in which Saudi Arabia is going to lead the way on this. That the infrastructure that is being developed right now across the US, across the UK, China, Russia, everywhere, is going to be the framework for the 2030 system that the World Economic Forum and others have talked about. We know that the WHO have just accepted the Palestinian flag. Just, you know, this is another in a step towards the recognition of a Palestinian state. We know that Russia, certainly the Kremlin, have came out and said that Trump is deranged, that he is having a mental breakdown in terms of his rhetoric as of how harsh. Or how Putin is a different person. We've also seen the worst ever attack upon Ukraine by Russia using Iranian drones. Right? Something that's not new, but at the same time, the intensification of this while there are nuclear talks going on with Iran. This was, by the way, the fallout that apparently Donald Trump and Benjamin Netanyahu had over the policy to go forward with this. We saw that Steve Witkoff walked out of talks early after arriving to talks 2 hours late with the Iranian delegates on Saturday on the fifth round of these nuclear talks. All of this is happening. We have seen that we're coming up to we've just had the preparatory meeting for the two-state solution, both in New York and in Paris, France. We have also had the Arabian nations come together for the same idea on this. We know that the WHO and the combination of the WHO Pandemic Treaty and the IHR, International Health Regulations, that were modified in June of last year, have come together to put a framework that takes away the sovereignty of nations. We know that there's chimera experiments being put out there everywhere. We know that there is a push and a plan to not just a national digital ID, which is here, but to a global digital ID. So I don't know about you, but I believe that we are at a crisis point. Right, let's say hello to people before we really kick into things. So we've got Jared here, Emma's here, Asset Ministries, Arrow Wish, our, excuse me, teeth need to go in. Arrow Whisperer is here. We've got Delita is here. Share Safe by Grace. See Blessed. We've got Caterlin here. Sherry is here. Annette's here. Sir Pierce the Veil. John Paul is here. Debbie is here. Laura B. Deborah. Emma UK. We've got Steve Conn here. We've got Kathy B. Asset Ministry. We've got Yvonne Kennedy, Sue Cole, Red. We've got guys, as you're coming on, make sure you say hello. We have loads to talk about. And I'm gonna preface today that I intend to not upset or isolate any groupings of people. Okay? When I'm talking about the things that I'm talking about today, I am talking about the structures behind belief systems as opposed to the individuals within those. Okay? That'll make more sense in a minute. So, we're talking about the door to chaos being open, to this crisis point. If you think back to June, was it June? Well, you think back to summer of last year when we had that display at the Paris Olympics, and we had this display in which they had both Dionysus and Apollo on display at the setting of the Lord's Supper. Now, Dionysus, if you look into Greek mythology, is not just the god associated with drink and wine and revelry, but he is also associated with chaos. And he is the flip side of the coin for the sun deity Apollo to come out and bring order. Now, Apollo can be attached to Apollyon, but it can also be attached to the name given to the Antichrist in 2 Thessalonians 2, the son of perdition, Apollyon. So what you get is chaos and order, and these two go hand in hand. When you start to see chaos reign and it ramp up at an exponential rate, then get ready. They're going to try and bring order out of that chaos. And that order is not order in how God brings order out of chaos, but it is control in place of order. We saw that on, what are we on, Tuesday? On Monday, that there's this crisis happening in Japan in terms of the government bonds being sold off. Now, when you understand this, Japan is the largest holder of US debt. And to try and get them out of the debt cycle and the coming severe financial crash, they have been selling off government bonds. They've been selling off US debt. And as they've been doing that, they've noted, and it's been noted around the world, that there is less of a want for to buy these government bonds. The Office of Budget Responsibility has said that public spending in the next decade is to reach 60% GDP. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the finance side of things. That's not my focus today. But I need you to be aware that there is a financial chaos moment at our doors. As a result, public debt worldwide will be, according to this Office of Budget Responsibility, they believe by 2075, which by the way, they cannot predict that far, but it happens to be the end of the Essene calendar church age. That is when the millennial starts, the millennium reign, according to the original calendar of the Bible. Now, debt to GDP is the problem here, okay? If you look at the countries right now, I'll give you some stats. Japan is 235% debt to GDP. So their debt is 235% compared to the GDP, the gross domestic product. Canada is 113%, Italy 130%, 137%, USA 123%, France is 116%. And the thing to note is not one government in the world seems to be doing anything about this. Now, as for me, I believe that the reason they're not doing much behind this is because they're waiting for the crash for the implementation of the digital system. Now, we know that there's been this trial with a digital ID for Europe. We know that the UK's digital ID is in place. We know that other digital IDs, they're all in the soft rollout phase, are happening around the world, including Real ID in the US. They started on May 7th and they started their campaign for this. But that digital ID will be linked to a central bank digital currency. And if you read any of the reports, that is apparent. It's not like a possibility. It's coming. So we're at this crisis point, and it seems to be like that for me, that what you're noting is that you're seeing all of these world leaders, and it appears like they're taking a leaf out of Nero's book, where they are fiddling while Rome burns. Now, the reason is because we're in an interregnum period, a period between the destruction of the old world order and the arrival of the new world order. We are seeing the beast system being built. We're seeing it being developed. And as we're seeing it being developed, I want to look at the spiritual connotation of why, how this comes into play. And I want to look at it from probably looking at the church, because as Peter tells us, judgment starts in the church. But I also think that culture should flow downstream from the pulpit, okay? And then politics comes from the culture. But the problem is politics has affected the culture, and the pulpit, for the large part, has been taking its cue from the culture, where they've been adopting same sex this, same sex that. They've been adopting many ways to the same destination. They've been adopting all of these things that are culture based from a political ideal, as opposed to how it should be said that men of righteousness, speakers of righteousness, should be standing up and impacting the culture with the truth of Christianity. But when the church waters Christianity and waters the word down, then the reverse happens, and the political aspect fills that void. So you even think about it this way: how many people are looking for a political savior right now? Now, I'm not just talking about Israel. We know that that's how they see the Messiah. But I am talking about people looking, well, I like that politician. That politician will never let me down. Well, here's the thing. You can be 100% guaranteed, if you put your faith in man, you will have that faith quashed. You will be let down. Our faith is to rest in the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and him only. And the problem is that when the church starts to embrace politics and culture, not to the point that we are not affecting politics and culture, but we're trying to get buddy with them, then the church becomes like the church of Pergamum of Revelation chapter 2. Does this make sense, guys? Keep commenting away. Let me bring my phone up so I see the comments. I can see them here, but for some reason I find it a little bit easier on my phone. Bear with me. Live chat. Okay, there we go. So, guys, if you look at this, I think that we have to look at the term of chaos. Now, the term of chaos in Hebrew is the same term that we see in Genesis 1. It is the same term used for void. So when we talk about the earth was void and without form, that word there is tohu bohu, or it's two words, right, in Hebrew. But it also describes a tumultuous state. It's not just completely empty, it's a state of what would be seen as perpetual chaos. Now, this goes into every ancient teaching and every ancient myth, including the Bible's narrative, right? So, the Bible's narrative we see in Genesis 1 is that there is the tohu bohu across the earth. Now, we see in Isaiah 45, I think it's verse 18, that God did not allow chaos to sit, but he spoke to chaos, and boom, there was order out of chaos. Now, every other ancient world, whether it's Mesopotamian culture, Mesopotamian, whether it's Sumatran, whatever it is, they have that same idea and that same narrative, that they would identify chaos as a beast. And that beast, in most ancient cultures, if not all, represented a sea serpent, dragon-like, serpent-like, and usually with many heads. The Greeks called it Hydra, right? We call it Leviathan, or according to the book of Job, we also call it Rahab. This is the chaos beast. So what we see at the beginning of creation is that there is a chaos myth that goes throughout all cultures. In Christianity and Judaism, we talk about this in form of Leviathan of the sea. In the Babylonian culture, it was Tiamat, and it was Marduk conquering Tiamat. But the truth of this is to understand that chaos is a beast. And it's a beast that tries to rear its head, according to the Bible, at the end times. Now, I'm pre-tribulation rapture. I do not care if you're post or mid. I'm telling you what my belief system is. I'm a pre-trib rapture believer, a premillennial believer. However, at any point of whether you see yourself as pre-trib, post-trib, mid-trib, there is a beast that rises that we see in Revelation 13, and that beast comes out of the sea, 7 heads, and we know that that beast is not a beast as in some sort of chimera-like individual or chimera-like monster. This beast, according to the book of Daniel, is an empire, and it is an empire that has the personification and the characteristics of the other beasts that went before, including the Grecian, including the Persian, the Media-Persian, including the Babylonian system, and it incorporates them in its nature for the end times. So it's an empire rising. Now, we talked about this briefly yesterday. And I apologize about the audio problems yesterday. I couldn't do anything about that. It was a problem with the system and a problem with loading it up to YouTube. But whenever you looked at what I was saying yesterday, the European Union has the European Defence Union now. So this is the building of itself into an army, having a standing army. The UK have signed control to some extent of that standing army into this agreement over to Europe. And at the same time, as they're building with the purpose of isolating themselves. According to Ursula von der Leyen, this is the disengagement from Washington and becoming an entity unto itself. It is the arrival of the reconstituted Rome as it's building. And as it's building, the framework has to be global. So the framework is being put in. And as it's building, you have to look at the spiritual intent and spiritual things that have happened to allow for this to take place. So, let's really get into this, yeah? There's your introduction. Let's really get into this. So, I was interested because you know that I think it was the 26th of December 2024 that Pope Francis performed a ceremony that has been done before by the Catholic Church, but he performed this ceremony where there's doors being opened to represent the Jubilee. Now, by the way, that is not a biblical representation of either the period of a Jubilee, because it's 25 years according to Catholicism. The Bible stipulates it's 50, but also it has more in line with theosophical Gnostic belief than it does with anything out of the Bible. Now, what he did that was different is that he went to Rabibia prison for the first time ever, and they opened a door there. Now, this is interesting to me. I don't know what you think, right? So he opened a door at Rabibia prison. Now, we can think about that in terms of a lot of things. That Rabibia prison was named after Scipione Rabibia, who was he was noted to be a member of the Inquisition, kind of high up in the Inquisition. And the prison is named after him. And so Pope Francis opens this door. Now, there's been a lot of reports about the death of Pope Francis and how he died. And apparently, now I don't know this, but I have seen a lot of reports. I've seen a lot of people come out saying that the nurses and the doctors verified that the time he was in hospital pre his death, that he started screaming. I don't know, you can comment if you've seen this. He started screaming and yelling that there was a hole that was opening up and there were demons at the end of his bed, and he started screaming and yelling and he had to be calmed down. And that is the report that's been put out. I don't know to its authenticity, but I have seen it put out by other sources. Well, that doesn't surprise me, right? In the sense that if you're opening doors to things, if you're opening doors, for instance, to the prison, if we talk about that in terms of a biblical settings, if you're opening the doors to hell, in terms of hell is a prison at this stage, if you're opening the doors or the gates to that, what do you kind of expect? Now, here's the thing. Obviously, we have a new pope right now, and there was all of this stuff in terms of the St. Malachy's prophecy, right? And we're going to discuss, like I said, a lot of things. There will be a lot of tangents tonight, but it will all make sense, hopefully. So we know that Pope Leo XIV, or as I call him, Pope Bob, because that's his name, we know that he wasn't necessary. There were three candidates who could have fitted the Peter Romanus prophecy of St. Malachy to the T. And so everybody was kind of thrown as St. Malachy's prophecy thrown out. Now, here's the thing. I will preface this by saying St. Malachy's prophecy is not a biblical prophecy, and therefore it is open to error. And at the same time, you can have someone who is in error and walking in error hear from God too. We can take as a preface for this the story in Numbers 22 to 25 of the sort of, let's say, anti-prophet Balaam, who obviously could hear from God, and obviously he had some sort of gifting in that, but he wasn't always walking with God, and as such, can we take the authenticity of what he says? Well, the thing is one, a clock can be right twice a day, but also a broken clock can be right twice a day, but at the same time, I do believe that there are other. When you talk about the gift of prophecy, according to 1 Kings 22, I think it is, there are lying spirits that can come out and deceive the prophets too. And there are prophets, according to those who operate off a prophetic gift, like Balaam, who are completely askew and completely off, but it doesn't mean that they don't also hear. Now, this is a controversial subject because the thing is that we attest prophecy based on scripture. But at the same time, we have to look, is there anything in this? And one of the things that was interesting for me, obviously the declaration of Peter the Roman seems a bit superfluous, right? Because Peter is the title in terms of the papacy, right? They believe that Peter was the first pope, right? And because he was the bishop of Rome, and he was the bishop of Rome. And they take Matthew 16 as the reasoning behind it when Jesus says, upon this rock, I will build my church. But what he is actually talking about is, one, that they were standing at the foot of Mount Hermon, right? The place in which the rebellion first happened. But two, the rock that I really see that Jesus is referring to is the revelation that Peter had as to the identity of Christ. And that's what he builds his church upon. But the Catholic Church have taken the office of the papacy and ran with it as the Bishop of Rome. Now, I find this peculiar to a certain extent because when you look at it, Rome as a church wasn't of real interest in biblical terms. Yes, Peter becomes the Bishop of Rome. But the real church that was the integral birth of the church was the Church of Jerusalem. And its leader was James. And if you even go past that, you get the 7 churches of Asia Minor, right? We get Ephesus, Sardis, we get Pergamum, Thyatira, Smyrna, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. We get the 7 churches of Asia Minor, which were an extension of Jerusalem church, right? They were an extension of the Jerusalem church, and they were mentioned. There was no mention, or no letter by Jesus to the Church of Rome. And there was no letter to the Church of Jerusalem. Why? Because Revelation, despite what people try and, some preterists try and say, Revelation was written around 90 AD. So it was after the destruction of Rome. So therefore, at that point, no Roman church, and instead it's the 7 churches of Asia Minor that are the focus. The Church of Rome only really garnered, I guess, notoriety under the establishment of Catholicism. And when you look at all of this, I think that you start to have to take, right, is the Malachy prophecy real? Does it have any weight? Well, let's look at what has been said. Recently, Pope Leo XIV, let me see if I can find this. This is why I should name some of these things. Yeah, here we go. Pope Leo XIV has declared himself a Roman. He has declared himself Roman. Now, yes, it's a ceremonial thing that happens, but this is a declaration made my ears prick up. It made me go, right, hold on a minute. Is this kind of the personification of the fulfillment of St. Malachy's prophecy to some degree? I don't know if it is, and I don't put much weight in it because it's not a biblical prophecy, but I will say it's interesting. He would be classed as the office of Peter anyway. So if he then comes out with a public statement saying that he is Roman, then I don't know. It just, for me, it kind of adds a little bit of weight. As does, now listen, let me preface this again. There was a prophecy in 1954 by an individual who I do not behold to his theology, nor do I say that he was completely prophetic, because he definitely got stuff wrong. But it's interesting. And like I was trying to preface all of this prophet talk, that there are prophets who are completely faithful and faithful in their walk despite their ups and their lows, like Elijah or Elisha, like Amos, like those prophets that go through the Old Testament. But then there are those who also, like Balaam, prophesy but still have evil intent. And then there are those, according to 1 Kings 22, that are prophesying, but they're prophesying under a lying spirit, or they're deceived. They don't have discernment, so they couldn't be of the office of prophecy or of prophet, but they perhaps are hearing things. So this is William Branham. Now, William Branham is a controversial figure, but this is a prophecy of 1954 that came out. And I don't know if the audio is great, so just listen to it and see what you can hear. Let me just...
Of Rome,
Saluto speciale.
a special greeting.
I believe one of these glorious days, when the United Confederation Church goes together and the new Pope is brought out of the United States and put over there according to prophecy, then they'll form an image like unto the beast, and I'll tell you, the true church of God will be drawn together.
Okay, so if you didn't pick up, because it's kind of like a tinny recording, and again, I am not putting any weight on William Branham in terms of, I do not behold to his theology. He was in error in quite a few things, but that doesn't mean, that the people don't hear the individual failures of a human being, or the walk into deception. Doesn't mean that we throw everything out with the bathwater. And I'm not saying that this is something to hold to, but I am saying it's interesting that he prophesies of an American Pope, and that American Pope leading the way to the image of the beast. Now, if that had been said about, I don't know, the 1970s, I would have maybe found it hard to believe, or the 1980s or 1990s. But now that we're in 2025 and we're seeing the rise of the European beast system, along with what I believe is his Babylonian counterpart certainly getting involved, talking about Saudi Arabia getting involved with Middle Eastern policy and perhaps directing Middle Eastern policy, this is interesting to note to me. We can look at an awful lot of things, but like I said, it's if we trace this back, and let's slow things down a little bit, let's trace things back to where things are, in my opinion. I believe the Roman Catholic institution has a role in end time events. Now, whether that's the fulfillment of St. Malachy's prophecy, or whether that's the fact that I take dispensationalism as the Roman Catholic, the era of the Roman Catholic Church being represented by Thyatira in Revelation 2 and 3, Revelation 3, in terms of the corrupt church. I believe that the Roman Catholic institution has a role in end times. Now, I believe it for a number of reasons. One, because when you look at Zechariah 5 describes three beings. It's a prophecy, it's a vision of the prophet Zechariah, and he sees three women with wings. One is the woman of wickedness, right? And what happens is the other two lift the woman of wickedness who's in a bowl, and they take her to the land of Shinar, the original building of the Tower of Babel. They turn her over and she is exposed. Now, in biblical prophetic hermeneutic typology, what we see is that's representing is religious forms, right? I believe that is Islam, Judaism, and Catholicism, and I believe that that's what we have seen to some extent in 2022 with the development of the Abrahamic family house. Let me know your thoughts, right? Let me know what you think on this, right? Because the thing is like I said, I believe, and when I say this, and this is why I prefaced this earlier, when I'm talking about the institution, I'm not talking about the individuals. Okay, um, I I know plenty of Catholics who love Jesus, who are in love with Jesus, who believe that they're saved by grace through faith, and they're not really what I would say as systematic. They're not really entering into the systematic Catholicism, because the systematic Catholicism has its roots in an agenda from the enemy. And I think this is where its role in the end times comes from. So, for instance, like I said, Rome being the centric element to, and the Bishop of Rome being the central force and element to their faith, is counterintuitive when you read the Bible. This is why there was so much of a, um, I guess, a deception when it came to trying to keep the layperson reading the Bible and to try and keep the Bible in Latin. Why? Because if the people read the Bible, one of the first things that they would have problems with is the papacy. The idea of a bishop of Rome. Well, Rome wasn't really the central issue. Jerusalem was. And even from Jerusalem, it was the Asia Minor churches. It wasn't really Rome. That didn't happen until Constantine. And what you saw, I believe, was the ploy of the B'nai Ha Elohim, the fallen angels that are prophesied about all the way through the Bible. They're talked about in Psalm 82, Deuteronomy 32, talked about in Isaiah 34. And what we're seeing with the Catholic Church is I believe, the agenda or the strategy from the fallen to corrupt the institution, hence being Thyatira, the corrupt church, to corrupt the institution, the body of Christ, and to take that corruption right up until the return of, well, until the coming on the scene of their guy. Am I upsetting people, or is this making sense? Let me put it this way, right? If you go back to Rome, in terms of the first 2 centuries, in terms of the development before we get right up until Constantine, one of the major players or major religions in that time was Mithraism, right? So Mithraism was adopted by the Roman soldiers. It was their religion. They loved it. You've got a pantheistic religious setting in the Empire of Rome, but Mithraism had started to come to the fore until Constantine says, right, we're going to take Christianity after his vision. However, when he took Christianity, he didn't depart it from Mithraism. He combined the two. Now, this is important because when you start to understand this, this starts to show you the RC's role in the end times. So Mithras, according to let's say chief Satanist Aleister Crowley, the guy who considered himself the most wicked man on earth, he called himself the Beast. He put out the teaching, and it's in other forms, it's in Gnostic forms, that Mithras is the son of Baphomet. Now, if you know what I'm talking about when in terms of Baphomet, if you would look at any sort of depiction of the Church of Satan right now, what you get is the depiction of Hasatan, the Satan, is Baphomet. And Mithras is the son of Baphomet, according to ancient teachings, but also according to modern day Satanism. Now, Mithras was combined into Christianity. This is where we get, and we've talked about this before. Now, let me just preface this. I celebrate Christ at Christmas. I also celebrate Christ every single day. So I'm not somebody that says, oh, you can't celebrate Christ at Christmas because that's the wrong day. No, I can celebrate him every day I want. But we do know that the birth of Mithras was depicted as the 25th of December, the same as Sol Invictus. In fact, the two are integrated as the same individual. And Mithraism is it's this counter to Jesus. It's kind of like, if you put it this way, in Ezekiel 8, when Ezekiel tunnels he's lifted in a vision and he goes to the temple and he tunnels in through the outer court, he sees the image of jealousy. Now, this image of jealousy, there is in my belief, the statue of Tammuz, the son of Semiramis, right? So Semiramis has a son who is Tammuz. Tammuz is also linked to Mithras and Sol Invictus, right? And what you see is this connection of the enemy trying to superimpose their guy as a pseudo-Christ, because that's the real Greek term, it's not antichrist, a pseudo-Christ into place so that people will accept him when he comes. Does this make sense, guys? Tell me you're tracking with me. Let me know you're tracking with me. Hit one if you get what I'm saying. It's the easiest thing for me to see. And it makes it a little bit easier just for me to carry on. Yeah, there we go. We've got some ones there. So, you had the birth of Christianity. You had the birth of the church. You had, in Acts 2, you had the development of the Jerusalem church. You had the development of the Asia Minor churches. Then you get the development of the not really under Peter, because Peter was the first bishop of Rome, but obviously it really sort of happens later when it's accepted under Constantine that you get this Roman papacy. And the thing is the papacy, for me, I've got issues with, as a Protestant, I've got issues with anyway, but it's interesting to me that what you see is that there is a noted agenda, in my opinion, if you look into ancient sources, and certainly medieval sources. So remember, we're talking about Pope Francis opening up those doors, certainly in the prison of Rabibia, or which is connected to Scipione Rabibia of the Inquisition. And there was Pope Francis was off a movement. We know that technically there would have been objections to Pope Francis being Pope because Pope Francis was Jesuit. He was off the Jesuit order. And as a general rule, they're not popes. They tend to reflect the Black Pope. So the Jesuit order reflects the Black Pope. In other words, they're the kind of the power behind the power, but they don't take center stage. But Pope Francis did. When Benedict didn't, he just kind of retired, stepped aside, and Pope Francis took over. And I'm looking at this through spiritual eyes and saying, did he set a plan? Did he set a strategy? Did he set a way for an individual to come on the scene who would continue in his form, but perhaps be the fulfillment of Peter Romanus, perhaps be the fulfillment of, him who brings in the image of the beast, and perhaps not. I'm not saying, for so saith the Lord, I'm saying it's interesting to note, but I do believe the RC has a role in end times. And I believe St. Malachy believed that, because he talked about the destruction of the city of Seven Hills, aka Rome. And I know people have tried to cement that with other places, but you can't take the things out of context. He was talking about Rome. So when we look at this, when we get to about the 15th century, there was the Spanish Inquisition that sort of came to the fore. Or let's say 1500s. Probably about late 1400s, early 1500s, the Spanish Inquisition came to the fore. And within that, you saw the rise of the Jesuit movement. The Jesuit movement came under a guy called Ignatius of Loyola, right? And Ignatius of Loyola was charged. Now, this is important to understand. This will make sense, guys, right? Ignatius of Loyola received a charge during his term, okay? He was the founder of the Jesuit order, and his charge was that he was a sympathizer with the Alumbrados movement. Now, the Alumbrados movement were the movement that was based on Gnostic teachings within Spain, right? So Gnosticism is a massive term. It kind of applies so many different things, but it likes to allegorize everything. It likes to disembody, take us away from the flesh. That and in some forms, Gnosticism will turn around and say Christ didn't die in the flesh, and all of this. Gnosticism, and certainly the Alumbrados teachings, were the framework for most secret societies. In fact, the Alumbrados, also pronounced illuminated or also called the Illuminati, were practitioners of a mystical form of Christianity in the crown of castles during the 15th and 16th centuries. Some Alumbrados were only mildly heterodox, but others held views that were clearly heretical. Now, the Gnostics were problematic even if we go back to the early church. There was a Gnostic movement. In fact, the Gnostics kind of traced their teachings back to Simon Magus, back to the individual who tried to buy and purchase the giftings of the Holy Spirit. Does this make sense? Are we getting it? Okay, so you get the founder of the Jesuit movement. And the reason I'm showing you this is because, like I said, I believe the RC, the Roman Catholic Universal Church, has a major role in end times prophecy, not in a good way. But again, this is talking about the institution and not the individuals. Okay, but when you look at this, like I said, Ignatius was charged with sympathy for the Alumbrados movement. In other words, he was connected to it, and he certainly had Gnostic tendencies. Now you think, why is that important? Right. Well, when you start to look into the aspects of their teachings and aspects of what they talked about, this was a book. This is a Jesuit book of the, I think it's around 1519, maybe a little bit later. But if you look here, above it is the English translations. It says, among the canonical scriptures, decrepitable epistles are counted. In other words, this is putting it in line with scripture. So the Jesuit teaching put their own teachings and own books in line as infallible, just like scripture. Let me scroll down here. Hold on. Where's my stuff? Right. Okay. So this is from. Is this the right one? This is from, again, the same publication, and you'll see the English translation up here. It is quite clearly shown that the pontiff cannot be entirely bound or loosed by secular power, as it is established that he was called a god by the pious Prince Constantine, whom we mentioned earlier, since it is manifest that even God cannot be judged by men. So one of the things that the Jesuit order, which by the way Pope Francis was, and which by the way he kind of pushed that agenda in his term, they believe that the Pope was a god in terms of what they teach, in terms of the papacy. Now, this is their writings. This is not me trying to say this. This is their writings. Let me see. Where are we? I'm just looking for all of my stuff here. Apologies. It would help if I put it all in order. And I knew it. I knew I wouldn't put them all in. Okay, so it goes further. There's a lot more to those. There's a lot more. I have a lot more somewhere, but I want to go on a little bit further. How is the role effective of the certainly the papacy and the Roman Catholic Church when it comes to end times? Well, in this same publication, I've got a picture of this publication down the bottom, and I'll show you this in just a second. It shows you that the papacy, and certainly the RC movement and RC institution believes in enforcement. And that was the role of the Inquisition, enforcement when it came to adhering to the faith. But the question remains, which faith? If we trace it back to Mithraism, and we see that it was Mithras that was combined with Christ according to the Constantine movement, and Mithras, according to Satanism, is the son of Baphomet, who is being prepped for. Now again, let me just reiterate, this is not against those who have a genuine Christian faith who are Catholic. This is talking about the infrastructure. So, if you look at this, This is a quote from the Sacrosancta Concilia. Okay, this is again a medieval publication for the Jesuit movement. It talks about trying to control commerce, buying and selling, in terms of their adherence to the faith. Neither let any commerce be held with them in selling and buying, that the comfort of humanity having been lost, that may be compelled to return from their error of their way. I don't know what you think about that, but I find that shocking. Forbid under an anathema that any should presume to keep them in their houses or on their lands, sustain them, or transact any business with them. So this is a part of the Jesuit teaching, right? A part of the Jesuit teaching, of which Pope Francis was a Jesuit member, the first Jesuit Pope. And this teaching is talking about coercion. Coercion and relating the coercion to the ability to buy and sell, relating to the coercion to the ability to control others. And we trace this back to the Mithraic movement, and we start to question, was there a subversive plan planted within the RC church that led people astray from following, led the institution astray from following Christ and put instead man in its place? When you start to look at things that say that the papacy should be considered divine or godlike, then I think it's time, to maybe take note of some of these things. So let me just check here, right? Yeah. This is an abbot's oath of the same order, right? I swear that heretics and schismatics and rebels to our Lord, the Lord Pope, or his successors, I will, to the extent of my power, persecute and beat them down. The Lord Pope. So what I'm saying is there a role for this RC institution? Again, not the individuals, because even the Church of Thyatira, there were faithful amongst them. This is the institution. Are there those in the institution who are leading the institution subversively through the Jesuit movement, through the continuation of into this new papacy? And I know he is of the Augustine order as opposed to the Jesuit order, but I'll get to this, right? Is there a motive to bring about something else through coercion rather than worship of Jesus, worship of a pseudo-Christ in terms of Mithras or the personification of Mithras in end times? Is this going on? I think that when you start to read through these ancient books, you start to see that there's an awful lot going on. Let me just see. Okay, so we know that the current pope is Pope Leo XIV. And there was all of this thing because there's a tradition that's kind of come in over the last couple of centuries that a lot of popes would name themselves after popes that inspired them. So let me go to my first one here. Where is that? So he named himself Pope Leo XIV, and a lot of people have reflected that this was a throwback to the social Pope, Pope Leo XIII. But Pope Leo XIII was not just known for being someone about social equity and things like that. Pope Leo XIII's papacy contributed to the resurgence, like actively and motivated to contribute to the resurgence of the Society of Jesus, aka the Jesuits, after the Restoration, right? So this was the push forward under the namesake that he took his name from, to push the Jesuit agenda forward. Now, Pope Leo the 13th, as far as I know, was not, well, I know he wasn't a Jesuit, but he pushed the Jesuit agenda forward. Now, you go back to Ignatius of Loyola, who was the originator of this Jesuit movement, who was certainly seemed to be a Gnostic in his belief and a sympathizer, if not part of the Spanish group that the Alumbrados, aka the Illuminati, which automatically people think you're absolutely nuts for talking about, but it was a legitimate group. But when you think about this, I think that there's more to the grabbing hold of this name. We have seen that Pope Leo has came out and reaffirmed the things that Pope Francis stood for, specifically building bridges between religions. That was one of his statements on the 19th of May. He wanted to continue the work of Pope Francis in the building of bridges in terms of integration of religions so that there is world peace. Now, in terms of that, I am fine. Like, I think that we can respect everybody. But in terms of building bridges by watering down your faith and saying, like Pope Francis did, that we can all say benediction to the same God, or it's all the same God, it's one way, or it's all one God in all different ways, and all of this, major issues with that. And like we say, we look to who he took his namesake from. Pope Leo XIII, who pushed the Jesuit agenda and the Jesuit movement, and Pope Leo X, right? Pope Leo X is, this is Simon Beginus, Bishop of Modrush, on Pope Leo X. Now this is a quote. "But weep not, daughter of Zion, for behold, the Lion of Judah, the Root of David, comes. Behold, God has raised up for thee a Savior." This is a Jesuit book, right? "Who shall save you from the hands of the spoilers? We have expected thee, O most blessed Leo, as the Savior that was to come." Now, is that not telling? Is that not telling that, yes, we've just seen that they believe that the papacy was in line with deity, but at the same time, in the Jesuit writings, and like Ignatius of Loyola was a soldier who was injured in war and then became a priest, and the Jesuits were known for being soldiers with loyalty to the papacy, but the papacy goes from being a position as a bishop to being God incarnate. What more preparation would the Antichrist need to have someone in that position set him up and give authority to him and speak, give him the okay? And when you look at the namesake that we got everybody saying, oh, he chose Leo the 14th after Leo the 13th because he was a social warrior. Well, he chose him. We don't know why he chose him, but one of the things that we know Leo the 13th did is he promoted Jesuit movement, and he certainly caused the resurgence of the Jesuit movement. And Leo the 10th, we saw the teachings there that it was that they were putting the papacy as divine. Let me know your thoughts on this before I carry on. Listen. It's not about hearing. It's not about listen. If it gives you a headache, I apologize, but at the same time, I'm here to actually speak into what people are seeing right now and the proximity alert that we have. Here's the thing. I could give you different reasons for why I believe we're at a chaos point and why Christ's return could be imminent. I'll give you one here that is probably, to me, the biggest sign that Christ's return is imminent. Croc enthusiasts can now buy mini Crocs that attach their regular size Crocs so that they can wear more Crocs. And there we see Jesus saying, start the rapture. I think, look, when all of this is happening, you don't get bogged down by what you see. You realize this is happening, and you realize the agendas at play, and you realize what is going on, and you realize that there is a subversive plan, but you're not shaken by it. You're not moved by it because our faith is in Christ. You know, if we start to take our faith away from Christ and start to look at different things, we get deceived. And this is what I'm saying. We want to step away from what can be considered deception. For instance, right, you take the Catholic Church, right, and the Roman Catholic movement, and then you take the integration of Gnosticism within that movement, certainly through Constantine, certainly through Mithraism, certainly through the medieval birth under Ignatius of the Jesuit movement, and you see that Mary is deemed the Queen of Heaven. Are we all aware of this? Hit one if Mary is considered the Queen of Heaven, or not. If you know that Mary is considered the Queen of Heaven, hit one if you know what I'm talking about. There, we've got it. Good. Okay, so that is taken from a Gnostic approach. So really, the Queen of Heaven, according to Gnosticism, is Sophia. Okay, now this is why it's important, and this is why it's important for this season right now. Sophia is this goddess of wisdom in Greek mythology. If you don't remember that recently, I think it was a few years ago, they came out with this robot AI thing and they called her Sophia after this goddess. Now, Sophia is the who kind of with the integration of Gnosticism and Catholicism together, certainly with the embracing of Mithraism and Christianity, because Constantine wanted to bring peace to an empire and he wanted uh, to enforce Christianity upon them, would have caused the polytheists to go absolutely berserk. So he pushed them and meshed them all together. So you've got this Sophia character. Now in Gnosticism, Sophia is the founder or creator, or some will say mother of the archons. Okay? Archons, Archons, right? Archons, or hierarchy, right? Now, that's important. We see the word archons used in Ephesians 6, verse 12, I think it is, when Paul gives the list of our hierarchical enemy in terms of principalities, powers, authorities, all of these. Now, archons fits in there. So when we look at this, what you've got, now this is how it's adopted into, it's how you see Gnosticism and Mithraism all combined, and Catholicism combined to create a counter route rather than going on the straight path. A route that says that you're saved by your works, not faith. A route that says that you can pray to an individual you call Father, despite the fact that you're to call no one Father but God. Like a route that takes you off slanted to the side, right? So you've got this Sophia. She has 12 archons under her, right? These 12 birthed archons. Now, these archons are known in Greek as, the Greek word archons is also hierarchy. Well, what do the Gnostics believe today? If you look at the theosophical beliefs of Alice A. Bailey, Alice A. Bailey taught that 2025, this year, would be the year that would mark the externalization of archons, the externalization of hierarchy. Now, if you go further with this, if I'm losing you, I'm sorry, but I'll try and make it make sense to you. So these archons are based on the 7 wandering stars. So they're all named after these wandering stars that First Enoch 18 talks about, that Jude talks about, that are apostates. Right? These wandering stars that leave their first abode of following Christ and Christ alone and start following man's ways, whether it's through praying to saints, whether it's through, which by the way, you can't pray to saints. If someone is dead, they're dead, right? Their spirit is either in heaven or they are locked in eternal damnation. There is no purgatory. There's no praying to them, right? Anything like that is more in line with Samuel's case with the witch of Endor and bringing forth what do you call that, mediumship, actually bringing an evil spirit up. It will be a demonic spirit. It is not a saint that you will end up praying to. But that is taught, and that is a different route. So when you see the externalization of hierarchy that Alice A. Bailey talks about, and this being the year where, not specifically this year, but from this year, because it's not made obvious, where they believe the Matarah, the world teacher, the Messiah, will come on board. Well, that individual will not be Jesus. That individual will be the personification of the counter pseudo Jesus. It will be the Mithraic figure. It will be the pseudo-Christ, the antichrist. And therefore, if anybody watches this video post-rapture, and it's still there, YouTube's still there and all of that, I want them to see this and judge through biblical lens who it is that is here in front of you, standing in the, if you're in the midst of that tribulation, standing in the temple, presenting themselves as God. And then ask yourself, where have all those Bible-believing Christians gone? Because the thing is the enemy doesn't just work through standing out there with a pitchfork and standing in complete opposition to Christianity. He realized from the very beginning that the one thing that he could do is infiltrate and corrupt from within. We see this from Genesis chapter 4 with Enosh. We see this in 2 Timothy 3 when they creep in, making captives those of the gullible. And who do they liken them to? Who do they liken those demons and that doctrine of demons to? Jans and Jambres. Now, Jans and Jambres were Egyptian magicians of the house of Pharaoh. In some Jewish teaching, some Hebrew teaching, they believe that they were the sons of Balaam. And what happened is on the Exodus, they says, we're not staying here with this Pharaoh guy where everything's going wrong. We're going to go and we're going to infiltrate Moses' movement. And according to some extra biblical sources that were known in Jewish history, they would infiltrate, and they were involved in the Korah rebellion and certainly sowing deception. They were involved in the Mount Sinai worship of the Apis bull, the golden calf. They were involved in all of that because they were sowing that deception in through a little voice. That is, they came along looking like they had a form of godliness, but denying its power therein. And I believe an institution, I believe the Roman Catholic institution, and like I said, not Roman Catholics, but the institution is set up for that. It's set up to have an individual in the papacy who is seen as a deity, who is seen as God's representative on earth. When we talk about the word, he is seen as the vicar of Christ, right? The vicar of Christ. And as he is seen as the vicar of Christ, that vicar means in place of. It doesn't mean a representative of, it means in place of. By the way, if you break the words down, and I don't believe this is the mark of the beast, but I believe that, I know some do, vicarious, vicar, right, has a numerical value in Roman numerals of 112. Philia has a Roman numeral value of 53. And Dea has a Roman numeral value of 501. Add them together, you get 666. Now, I just think that that's by and by. I do not think that's the mark of the beast, and I do not think that's the case. But I don't think that the Antichrist will be a pope. But I do think the office of papacy lends itself certainly to the agenda of the enemy, and certainly to the office of false prophet. So let me see. Ooh. Did we have some trolls or something there? Have I missed something? Somebody's being timed out. Okay, so all I'm doing, if you disagree with me, that's all right. It's a free world. If you're being rude, the moderators will remove you. But I will say that there is a connection. It is, again, not against Catholics. I have, to be honest, I live in Northern Ireland. It's one half and one half, right? And 50% of people I know in my life are Catholic, and they can love Jesus so much. We are not talking about the individuals. We're talking about the framework of the institution that was set up by Constantine, furthered by the Jesuit movement under Ignatius of Loyola, which was an infiltration of the Alumbrados movement, which was Gnostic thinking, Gnostic teaching, and it's how Gnosticism worked its way in and continued to corrupt. And one of the things that you look at that in terms of corruption, what is the thing that is given to Thyatira? What is said to Thyatira? That they eat of meats worshipped to idols, or sort of sacrificed to idols. Well, that was one of the practices of Mithraism. In Mithraism, they had a Eucharist themselves. They modeled the Eucharist and they kind of tried to counter Christ in that, but they modeled the Eucharist and they again would eat offering onto idols. Now, Mithraism, they would say again, is, I'm talking about Gnostics, they would say, well, that's older than Christianity because it comes from Zoroastrianism, the Persian religion. But in truth, it's not older than Christianity because Christianity goes right back to the beginning of time. It is older than the arrival of Christ incarnate on the scene in Jerusalem, in Galilee. But that's okay because Christ was there in the beginning, right? The worlds, according to Hebrews 11, verse 3, were formed by the Word. He is the Word. So what I'm saying to you is that you're seeing corruption. Corruption infiltrates. So, guys, ready for questions? Have we got something from this? Is this making any sense to people? What are our thoughts? What do you think? Let me know. Keep it nice and friendly, and let me know your questions. Let me open this for questions. Okay, let me see. Discord. Oh, my phone's acting up. Hold on. Okay, yeah, we got some questions here already. Yeah. Okay, so D has asked. Her name comes up Denise Bryan, but her name's D, right? For Chrislam to succeed, do you believe that Catholicism will be used to add a more believable lie? Well, I think that there is something about this Pope being American, right? In terms of Francis, in terms of Benedict, there was always kind of a language barrier, and then you work through an interpreter. But when you have someone who is clear in what they want to articulate to the Western world, I think they'll be used. Now, certainly in terms of the UN, the Pope is going to be integral. The UN agenda, the furthering of this, I think that what we saw under Pope Francis was a building up of the platform in recent years of the papacy to be more in line with, or to be more integral with, the United Nations. Now, remember, the UN work off a framework that can be, in terms of ideology, Gnostic in itself, their connections with Alice A. Bailey themselves through UNESCO and things like that. So, yeah, I think what you will see is certainly in terms of Roman Catholicism, I think you'll see. Here's what I believe you will see. You will see a watering down of entrenched dogma in terms of biblical setting, not in terms of church dogma, but in terms of biblical belief, like the watering down of the Apostles' Creed, things like that. And when that happens, and then you have this fraternity of brotherhood that we saw primarily in the four under Pope Francis and Chrislam and all of that, that Pope Leo is all for, when you see that continue, it will be to accept all things from all forms, and that will give the framework for a more polytheistic approach for the harlot of Babylon. I believe that the harlot of Babylon, it's kind of a nuanced belief, but I believe it's scriptural. I believe that it will be the combination of the three monotheistic religions, but under the guise of complete polytheism. So it will be completely watered down, saying, look, it doesn't matter what God you serve. All ways, all roads lead to the same destination. And we're seeing that rise right now. So yeah. Yeah. Um, Remy has asked, anything that has recently happened that heightened in the spiritual realm right now with the launch of horse riders? I'm not sure as to the question, but I will say this. So I don't know anybody else who sort of went into this, but I believe the riders of the four horses, well, let's put it this way, they're not released, but they are going to and fro. Because Zechariah 6 tells us that they go to and fro on patrol. They're the same horses, but what the difference between Zechariah 6 and Revelation 6 is in Zechariah 6 they're attached to chariots, right? So they're pulling something. They're not completely free to run, right? But they're going to and fro on patrol from ancient times right to now. In fact, they can be connected in biblical original language to four Canaanite deities that are mentioned throughout the Bible and mentioned as being restrained by God. Fahad, Debir, Keteb, and Reseph. Reseph being him who sort of looks like the White Rider because he was seen as the deity of horses, which were spirits, right? So they're not released, but they are going on patrol. And as you see them going on patrol, that's the building of chaos. So the building of chaos, when you see wars, rumors of wars, Jesus talks about this in Matthew 12 or Matthew 24. And when you see wars and rumors of wars continuing and building, that's the building of chaos. That's the red horse walking faster and faster on his patrol, but not being led off not being unleashed from the chariot. The white horse, control and conquering, right? Well, we've seen that. We've seen that in terms of treaties. We've seen that in terms of what's coming in the next few weeks with this UN push, with this Arabian push to a two-state solution treaty. We've seen it with the likes of the Future Pact Summit. We've seen it with the WHO Pandemic Accord, with the IHR regulations, all of that. We've seen that. They're forms to take control, but the White Rider's not released. We've seen Japan's debt crisis hit 230% debt to GDP ratio. So that's the Black Rider riding, but it's not completely released because we're not living in a time where there's worldwide famine. The Pale Horse, we've seen the Pale Horse released in terms, there's another surge apparently of the C thing, right? Disease. And as that's the case, that's again the Pale Rider, but it's not completely released because it's not released under the conditions of Revelation 6. I hope that helps. Let me just... Question from Emmaus Road Productions. Do you see an ecumenical movement between the RC and the old mainline Protestant denominations, e.g. Lutheran, Anglican, and Islam, to form the basis foundation of the beast religious system? Yeah, right. So I don't believe, this is the thing, I know our focus has been on the RC, right, in today's rhetoric, but that doesn't sort of give everyone of the Reformed faith, everyone of the any Protestant denomination a Bible in this. In fact, many are lumped into that. That's the beauty about the seven letters. The seven letters talks about dispensation. It talks about type of churches. It talks about real churches, but it also talks about individuals, that there are those who have corrupted themselves with wickedness, that there are those who have become loveless, that there are those who have went to martyrdom for their faith, and there are those who have an appearance of being loving and alive for Jesus, but are really dead inside. Every individual can be of that. And I think there's many of the Protestant denominations that will align themselves with this. And certainly this is where we need to be so, I guess, so firm in terms of who and what we hold on to. This is one of the scriptures I keep going back to is Hebrews 12, 25 and 26, because 26 talks about a time of real shaking of heavens and shaking of earth. But 25 talks about the need to hold on or to grasp and discern the voice of God. And I think that that talks about a time in which the church is going to be shaken because there will be those who come out and think, look, it's going to be financially viable or beneficial to us to align ourselves with this Chrislam movement, with this many ways. Because look at we open the doors and there's so many people sitting on our seats. But this is why God gives us the warning that yes, there's going to be shaking. Hold on to His voice. Goes back to John chapter 10, because in John 10, His sheep know His voice. But then there's the rebuke of the hirelings as well. And I think that that's really key here. And there's going to be this unification process. If you look back to February 1st of this year, the Sanhedrin, I think I've got this for you. Hold on. The Sanhedrin, layers. Let me see. Put out a couple of different things, right? So they sent this to Trump. It says, we extend our heartfelt gratitude for bringing faith to the foremost of American and global cultures through the establishment of the Faith Office in the White House. I'll not get into that, right? But your recognition of the importance of religion in public life is a step towards restoring moral values and spiritual leadership in the world. And then they bring up the Noahide laws, the 7 Noahide laws that unite Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, because these are the laws pre the law. These are the laws in Genesis. You can see some of them there. Where's my next one? Here we go. And some of them here. And then it goes on to say, enclosed within this letter, we have included the universal ethical common code, which outlines the benefit of adopting the 7 commandments of Noah. Now, this is, again, a different covenant, because one, we're in a covenant with Christ in the New Testament. But when people look at that, there's a beneficial, I guess, global citizen aspect to the Noahide laws, and there will be many deceived to say, "Go, no, this is a good thing to get on board with." And I think whether you're of a Protestant denomination, whether you're Catholic or whatever, I think there will be loads of people deceived with that. Hope that answers it, sort of. Hope it sort of answers it. Let me see. Hold on. Jason has asked, have you read the book Project Bluebeam by Serge Monast? Sounds like at the moment of rapture, a holographic scene of alien invasion, nuke scenario will bring the world together, a new world order. And I'm very aware of Project Bluebeam in terms of, I've read up on it. I haven't read the book, but I am aware of it, and I think that it's very much like, I know Billy Crone says that, we go up, they come down. So it's as this psyop being performed to say the reasoning behind this, the reasoning behind the disappearance. And the thing is that could very well be, certainly with the theosophical Gnostic approach. And also, like I said, if we're talking about the Jesuit movement, it was very much under Pope Francis that we saw this push for contact with the extraterrestrials, and also the rhetoric that came out of the papacy during his term was, if we encounter these individuals, we would probably be unfit to baptize them because they would be spiritually more advanced than us. So I think that there's the prep there, not just to give it as an excuse for the rapture, but actually to turn around and say, look, these guys, these archons, these individuals are on the scene now, and these individuals are going to take humanity in the next level. In fact, this is what Helena Blavatsky taught. So she believed in the 7 root races. And once you got to the Aryan race, which was their belief that we're in now, right, which is race number 5, the next one to come was it was a visitation by a superior race, a spiritually advanced race that would help lift us up to the 7th race, where there would be this integration between our humanity and genetic splicing. Now I'm adding in the word genetic splicing, but with something else. And that's for me. I look at that and I go, well, she's thinking, and she's to me off her rocker, completely led astray by Satan. But she's thinking that these individuals come on the scene and it's going to be great. You're going to become like gods. It's like nobody reads Revelation chapter 3, or sorry, Genesis chapter 3. Remy has asked, is Sophia also related to knowledge or wisdom? Yes, she is seen as the Grecian god of knowledge and wisdom. Be back later saying, are you saying the Catholic Church is the harlot church in the end times? No. I am saying it will be used to set up the harlot system. The harlot system will not be the current form. However, it's to understand their role. Now, Thyatira in Revelation chapter 3 used to be known by a different name. That area in Asia Minor used to be called Semiramis, the same name as Nimrod's wife, the initial Queen of Heaven, right? And it's this kind of esoteric Gnostic approach. So when we add in that Sophia was seen as the Queen of Heaven, Mary was seen as the Queen of Heaven, Sophia gives you their intent. They believe that how they're saved is through some esoteric knowledge. So the Catholic Church, I believe, will be integral in facilitating that because they're set up to do that. But the harlot system will be a combination of, it will be pantheistic. It will be a combination of New Age with monotheism to create always everything's God, everything is worshipable, your God, all of this. That will be the harlot system, in my opinion. I think the scripture quite well sort of points that out. But I do not believe that the Roman Catholic Church will be the harlot system. Otherwise, it's been in existence since the 3rd century. But I believe it facilitates it. So I would like to ask, let's say, if you have a dream and someone like your father showing that you need to go to a place to get money, such as Egypt. It happened yesterday. I'm not sure. Look, the thing is I've had prophetic dreams. But I am worried that basically my preface for having a prophetic dream or having a dream that is of God is Job 33:14, that God will speak through dreams and visions of the night to stop us falling to pride. So the premise for that is God has, in my opinion, has spoke to us through scripture, we've ignored him. Has spoke to us through our pastors, we've ignored him. Has spoke to us through counsel of Christian friends and others, and we've ignored him. So he waits till we go to sleep to think, right, I'm going to get him and speak to him when he's sleeping and get actually so he gets it. And certainly I've had times like that a lot, actually. Do you see the connection with CERN and these days? I do, big time. Yeah, I do. And I don't just see the connection in terms of their scientific exploration of things, but I see it in connection of why choose CERN as an acronym. Most people don't just come up with an acronym based on, oh well, these letters make this. Usually they have the word and then they choose the letters, or they choose the words around the building words around it to form that acronym. And CERN means horned one. It is from Cernunnos or Cunanos in the Celtic religion, and in the oldest pagan deity, it is connected with Azazel, as is Baphomet. So when we talked about Mithras being the son of Baphomet, it is the connection with Azazel. Azazel, fallen angel in the book of Enoch. Azazel in Leviticus 16, the one in whom the sin of the people sits and is sent back out into the desert. So yeah, I certainly see that CERN is yeah, they're definitely involved, and even the Gotthard Tunnel opening back in 2016, definitely there's stuff about that. The ripping open of the Lamb, the individual dressed as Baphomet ripping open the land, and all the world leaders going, "Oh, isn't this great?" The 7 heads of the 7 beast. Does it represent 7 hills in Rome? Not really, right? So the seven heads are representative usually of nations, usually of what nations build up that empire. And the same with the 10 kings. So seven heads, 10 kings. So it's these nations that build up the empire. So it's not so much the hills, although the seven hills has been talked about in prophecy for years, but they're not representative of the seven. The seven hills are the seven hills of Rome, but they're not the seven nations, if you get me. Will the Roman Catholic Church introduce the false prophet, or will the Pope himself be the false prophet? That's a very good question. All these are good questions, but that's a very good question, because I would like to say we know, but we don't. The video I showed you earlier of the individual prophesying about American Pope back in 1954, and he would bring in the image of the beast. I don't put stock on the individual, so I don't look. I would not put faith in the individual, but I do believe, like I said, Balaam heard from God. He just didn't walk with God. What I'm saying is that it's a lack of discernment sometimes, and it's a lack of faith. But people do hear, but we don't put our faith in that. I don't know is the easiest answer here. This Pope could be, if he takes his derivative from Leo X, he believes that the papacy is deity. If he takes his derivative from Leo III, well, Leo III, interestingly enough, and remember that he chose a name based on past Leos. Is it Leo XIII who pushed the Jesuit movement? But Leo III was the individual who appointed Charlemagne as the Holy Roman Emperor. And I think that's interesting, because the Antichrist is given sort of like his blessing or his authority among people by the false prophet. So that's as far as I can take it. I can't say for certain. And even at this, I have to preface this, that there's so much to look into in this. We've only just scratched the surface. But when you look into this, you study ancient, certainly prehistory, ancient history, Herodotus and the father of ancient history. When you study these things, there's so much that comes to the fore that you have to kind of filter it out, and you have to try and piece it together. We do know that there's a Gnostic movement within the Catholic Church, but there could also be a Gnostic movement within the Reformed Church. And in fact, we do know that there was also a Jesuit agenda to corrupt the Protestant movement during the Reformation. So Gnosticism creeps in. And we don't know who the false prophet is until the false prophet emerges. Now, we do know that we are not here for the Antichrist, but I can't see that the false prophet could be on the scene before the Antichrist, laying and paving the way for him. Certainly Pope Francis kind of had his credentials out there, his CV out there for the position, but he was way too old to be that individual. So, can you talk more about the enemy of Christ and the church is saying will happen in 2025, and how does this correlate with the rapture and tribulation? So the enemy of Christ is basically the pseudo-Christ. Now, in terms of the 2025 agenda, I've taught this before, so I'll not go into it too deeply, but there is a statement. Let me see if I have the picture anywhere. I can't find it. So there's the statement that comes out within Theosophy called the Invocation, the Great Invocation. Now, the Great Invocation is about invoking the Matzorah. So basically summoning. So the great invocation in this teachings of the Theosophical movement, which is Luciferian, I don't care what anybody else says, I believe it's Luciferian. If you go to the core teachers, they believe that Lucifer was the real God, right? So when you look at this great invocation has a lotus flower taken from their Buddhist element and taken from there's certainly their their far east influence. They have this lotus flower upon the great invocation, and it's this statement about invoking the Matara, the world teacher, the Messiah, the uh, Christ consciousness that New Agers believe in, the load of nonsense, right? So one of the things that I found really, really interesting is that the 2025 has also been marked as the International Year of Cooperation. And the International Year of Cooperation conference decided to take the exact same image used on the Great Invocation as their logo. So, whether or not 2025 plays out as the theosophical belief states it is, and those that work off a counter to Christianity, I don't know, because the thing is God is in control of the timing. It is Christ who will end up opening the seals in Revelation 5. But what we do know is they are mad at work with it. They're trying to put the imagery out there, trying to put the rhetoric out there, the stipulations for cohesion, global citizenship, all of that is being put out there, and it is running at such a fast pace that I think if you blink, you'll miss it. Yeah. So, did I get everything? I think I got all the questions. I think possibly. Hold on. Uh, okay, so did you get anything from this? Let me know if it made any sense to you. And if it did, please do me the usual favor. Please share this. Please like this. Please put it on your own social media. Help us get out. Help us grow in our subscribers. If you're watching this today and you do not subscribe, consider subscribing. So yeah, so the Theos, I saw something that passed too quickly on the comments, but I saw something about light there. The theosophical belief is in the, oh, I've forgotten the name now. Is it something rays of light? Is I don't know. I'm tired now. So also this round table that I'm on Friday. If you're in the UK, watch it the day after. If you're in America, I think it's 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. It is like 1 a.m. my time, but it's myself, JB Hickson, L.A. Marzulli, Lee Brainard, Pete Garcia, John Haller, and Kurt Reed. It's Kurt Reed's show, so it's Pastor Kurt Reed. So you can check that out. If you do want to support the ministry, please feel free to do it. We really, really appreciate it. Some of you know the struggles that we're having at the minute, and what you guys did last week for the church was phenomenal, and it brought tears. It was phenomenal. And we, if you want to support us financially, if you can't support us financially, please pray for us. But if you want to, the links are there. We have got a Give, Send, Go. So if you're anywhere around the world, hit the Give, Send, Go link, and Victory Church Belfast, you can partner with us, and you can do that in any amount, a pound or whatever, and you can do that on a rolling basis. So I'm getting messages from the worship team. Hold on, let me just do this now. Give me 2 seconds. So, guys, again, if you got something from this, that's great. Hit one, share it, and all that business. Tomorrow we have Lee Brainard on. Um, yeah, the Prophecy Conference is 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Kurt Reid's channel. And you have to pray for me because that is also prayer and fasting time for us as a church. And so I'll be knackered in general. And it's 1 a.m. And I know all these guys can talk. And then after that, I'll hopefully get a few hours sleep in the morning. And then we're down for praise and worship at the church for on a Saturday for prayer and fasting for what's coming in this season. And then we've got our service on Sunday as well. So pray for me, please. Pray for supernatural energy because I can't drink too. I have started drinking coffee again after like 7 months off it, but I know I can't drink much of it without having problems. So yeah, sleep is overrated, but please, please keep me in your prayers because I don't want to fall asleep on camera while they're talking. Guys, God bless. I call you the head and not the tail, above and not beneath, kings, queens, and priests in Jesus' mighty name. And remember, you can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. Guys, God bless.